welcome to the Cam Otis Show. On this episode, new friend and sorry to say we were talking hockey, but Buffalo Sabres fan, Ken Babcock. Also, and real reason we're gonna avoid talking hockey, but the real reason Ken's here is to talk about his business Tango, which is really a unique thing, and I'm interested to dive into it more. Ken, good to see you, man.
Thanks for having me.
And before I dive in more, for those folks out in radio land, you got to jump over to the YouTube and check out Ken's background. I mean, the album wall covers, it'll make you jealous because it looks pretty cool. It's well placed, Ken. Well done in that.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. I mean, you've got the expert bookshelf, so you know a thing or two about backgrounds.
That's right. So, hey, man, I was wondering as I was reading up on you, 4 years at Uber, and what I always wonder when somebody spends that much time at a company that's like, because you were there when Uber was doing the hockey stick of growth.
Yeah.
What inspired you to step away from that and think, all right, I could do this stuff myself, be an entrepreneur?
Yeah. I don't know if it was specifically a one-to-one correlation, but you know, I think for me, what was great about my experience at Uber and seeing what success looks like is that in a lot of ways it simplified it for, you know, once you see it live, you're like, okay, well, that's something I can mimic, that's potentially repeatable. And, you know, contrary to what you see a lot of times in like the media or Silicon Valley, you know, with sort of this like Messiah complex of these geniuses coming in and inventing these crazy things. You know, what I appreciate about Uber is, you know, I saw it live and I was like, you know what, actually, yes, you need a lot of luck to go your way. Yes, you need to work hard, but the formula is not out of this world. So it was that, and it was also seeing a lot of my colleagues who leave Uber before I did, go off, start businesses, have some success. And that for me was also validation that like, hey, this wasn't just lightning in a bottle, one-time thing. The learnings here are actually applicable to, you know, a lot of different industries and new products and services.
So you said you saw success. What did that look like?
Well, you know, so I was there from 2014 to 2019. So there was success and there were dips and there were a lot of ups and downs. But I would say for the first, you know, 2 years I was there, every week was sort of a record week. You know, we'd come into an all hands and we'd look at the metrics and we'd say, all right, new record week. You know, we launched these many markets and, you know, our rides are this and our ridership is this and driver base is this, gross bookings is this. I mean, every week it was a new record. And so you knew that there was something special with that. But, you know, in terms of success and seeing what it looks like, and this is part of the inspiration for Tango, we had a very strong culture of documentation at Uber. You know, you may have heard of like, oh, the playbook for Uber launching a market. That was a real thing. There was a playbook, there were tactics, there were, you know, here's what we've learned. And so I think what was really powerful about seeing that success is like, you could actually see the recipes to having a successful launch, having a successful market. And the organization itself was, you know, had placed a high value on execution and like getting the job done, but also in tandem with that was constantly learning more about the business. So it wasn't just that, oh, every week's a record week, we're doing everything great. And a lot of companies can suffer from confirmation bias that way. But with Uber, it was like, okay, what do we need to understand more? Or what should we test? What should we experiment with? Is this still the best practice or should this evolve? And that to me was like the hallmark of a successful organization is like you embrace that learning mindset and you recognize that like the things that you need to do to be successful are going to evolve and change over time.
How did that change your perspective looking at other startups and other organizations? Because you talk about it being, repeatable, like a formula that's there. Was it something that kind of like shattered the glass? And then from then on, you've looked at other things. You're like, okay, that's not as crazy as it looks. What's really happening is, X, Y, Z. Did it kind of change your perspective like that?
I think so, a little bit. And I also think too, like I had to shake some habits as well. Because you just get used to a certain way of working and type of culture, and it doesn't apply everywhere. That doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. It's just different companies have different cultures and different ways of working. But it did, like, I think when we talk about identifying opportunities in the market and understanding, how a business could run or how a startup could function in a landscape, there were a lot of things for me that were easy to grasp on, and my co-founders as well. They had similar experiences in their careers where, by the time we were sort of honing in on the idea for Tango, we had a bunch of use cases and a bunch of roles and functions in mind for where a product like this would be a total game changer. So it definitely helped from that perspective.
So what's you set me up, and I got to ask, what's the habit, man? What you just, or if you want, you can give more than one, but at least one. What's the habit that you had to like, don't do it that way anymore?
Yeah. I think there was, we had, and this is also well documented. If anyone watched the show on Uber, you'd probably see some of this, but we actually had this core value that was called principled confrontation. And the idea was, the spirit of it was more, we debate things and we sort of let the best idea win. But what ended up happening was that it actually incentivized like sort of a lot of like aggressive behavior in meetings, a lot of combative nature. And because that was a core value, because it was also something that would come up in our performance reviews, you were sort of like forced to like, embody those characteristics or kind of get out of the way. And so that was challenging for a lot of people, myself included. And going, having experiences at other companies then where people weren't, kind of at each other's throats. I was like, okay, how do I operate, in this environment? My claws are down, or my guard is down now. And obviously I've learned that that's a much more like fulfilling workplace to be a part of. But I was just so used to going into meetings as if you were kind of going into battle. Definitely not a great analogy to use talking to a Green Beret, but
no, and I could tell you, I agree 100% with the concept of that in principle. Hey, don't just be a yes man. But I could see how that could spin into the finger in the chest, or as a buddy of mine, the knife edge, the old military knife edge thing, and you get that could really spark things up. So,
and even more so, I think that it creates that bias. I think you kind of already referenced this, Ken, of it creates a bias towards your own idea, where it's like, because you have to defend it that aggressively, you can't come into that office, into that board meeting with any sort of doubts around your idea anymore, because people are going to be coming at you all different directions. So you have to be ready to defend it with all of that. What I'm really curious about, Ken, is how did you polish that into a better version? Because I doubt you just left that there like, okay, well, that idea didn't work out. Like, how did you add a human component to that creates a better culture, but with that, with the debating, but without the argument, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think a lot of like what it came down to was, or at least why it didn't work at Uber was almost bad phrasing, right? Like principled confrontation. That in the two words.
Well, that frames you to confront people, like, quite literally, right?
Totally. And so, there were elements of that, that were good, like you said, Otis. And so what I try to screen for in my interviews for candidates at Tango is not like, are you going to defend an idea to the very end, but more, are you willing to change your mind? Are you going to actually invite perspectives into the conversation? And if there is a better idea in the room or in the virtual room, are you going to come around to that? And so I think a willingness to change your mind is kind of, it sounds like a 180 from that value, but it gets at what you're trying to enable, which is more idea sharing, more collaboration, more coalescing around like what is the best idea and where should we go forward, because that does require people to kind of make compromises away from their own ideas. But if you remove that personal nature out of it, I think that arrives at a better outcome for everyone.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things you're getting at there is that, it's about what is the outcome you're actually looking for, like what is the trait you're trying to select for in your team. And the person who's going to argue something to the death about it isn't necessarily the person who's going to create the best ideas, because they're going to get so, whether it's somebody else arguing against them or, their own doubts, they're just going to get latched onto that idea. So then as much as it does seem at odds with it, the person who's open to new ideas is probably the one who's going to contribute the most in the team environment.
Absolutely.
So have you applied this, or when have you applied that at Tango and felt that sort of, you needed to get up out of your chair in the conference room and one of your co-founders, give him the knife edge or poke him in the chest and just kind of wrestle it out, if you will?
Yeah. Thankfully we haven't had to do it too much. I think a big decision for us early on was kind of, do we go sort of tops down with this product, or do we go bottoms up? And, with that, it's a bigger decision. It's a huge decision for any software business, but, effectively, are you going to sell to the team leader, and are you going to focus all your efforts on an enterprise plan out the gate, or are you going to solve for that end user? I remember a lot of discussions. I think we raised our seed round talking about being kind of sales led or top down, quickly pivoted to being bottoms up and product led, which is what we are now. But there was a lot of back and forth there because, ultimately, sales led, a lot of people associate that with, you're going to have larger contract values, you'll be able to accelerate revenue faster. But for what we're building, which I know we have, we sort of buried the lead there a little bit, but for what we're building around streamlined communication, streamlined documentation, that pain point is felt more acutely by that end user. And so, we sort of arrived at this after going back and forth, was like, like the value that we're selling and the pain point that we're solving for is being more acutely felt by that end user. And so we took the path of being bottoms up, but I think the three of us have individually even flip-flopped a couple times, but so that was sort of the meat of a lot of like early conversations with Tango. So
I had a thought there, Camden, and I lost it because I thought you were going, and then I threw it out in my head. But what was the catalyst there? It's coming back if I stumble along enough. What was the catalyst that, to create that was the idea that with Tango, well, this is the problem, and we can build something that solves that problem?
Yeah, it for us, it took a few degrees of a few leaps, I guess, to get to that point. But when we met, so we were at Harvard Business School in our first year there. We had been working on ideas, we all had this sort of shared entrepreneurial ambition, and a real passion for team performance and just the idea behind it. We talked to a lot of professors that whose research was focused on like organizational behavior and why certain teams succeed, why others don't. It was just, it was an area for us that we cared deeply about. And what we kept asking ourselves is, why can't you take a high performer within a team and just replicate their know-how across the team? I mean, obviously there's a lot of factors, but the one problem that we honed in on is that, within organizations, internal knowledge it's not easy to capture, and it's not super accessible. I think my co-founder, Brian, our CTO, loves to use this analogy of a lot of companies are optimizing their processes as if they're like managing from the parking lot of a factory. They know who shows up every day. They know sort of who's walking into the factory, and they know the trainings that those people have had. And then they see like the shipments leave, but they don't know anything in between. They don't know why, oh, today we got 40 shipments, or maybe it was 50 today, but the same amount of people came in. We don't know why. And so that in between, that how, is something that we quickly honed in on. Is like that's a gap within a lot of organizations. And so we were familiar with the sort of incumbent ways of doing it, internal wikis, screen recording, videos. And we just felt that there needed to be a way to do it in the flow of work. When we talked about high performers and capturing their knowledge to scale it to the rest of their team, those high performers are also the same people that are overloaded with work. Everyone's given them more stuff to do. And so when it comes to documentation, that's often a secondary priority for them. They say, oh yeah, I guess I'll document it at the end of the day. Or like, I'll show you what I did when I can find some time. For us, we said, can we do that in the flow of their work? Like as they're completing their process, can we create documentation for them? Really as a huge time savings. And that's where Tango was born, was trying to basically save time for that high performer. And then as it turns out, everyone likes to save time, especially their own. And documentation is a pain point for a lot of folks. And so, what we have today, Tango is the easiest way to create step-by-step tutorials, complete with screenshots, descriptions, links in the flow of your work. And that's a pretty powerful value proposition for a lot of teams.
What it immediately brings to mind, and I think that's just why it's such a fascinating problem that you're talking about solving there as far as the internal knowledge, is it takes me out, and of course, Dad, but out to the rugby field, how you get the people who are the best players I've coached, best guys I've played with, are almost every time some of the worst people to coach. Like the worst people to do the coaching. There we go. Poor phrasing there. They can do something, but it's just, hey, look at this. Go do it. It's not hey, I put my elbow this way, therefore the ball spun that direction. They're not necessarily processing it as much there. And so I could see the value on that. I guess what I'm curious about is, how do you solve that problem of the person not necessarily, processing their own improvements? Because a lot of the time it's that improvement that they're not seeing, which can, be such a benefit to other people to mimic that kind of a behavior, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. On one end with documentation, we have the creator of documentation. That's that high performer persona that we talk about. And maybe in the rugby world, that's the player that's not so much the coach. And then, in the documentation world, on the other side of that, we have the viewer, the person who's trying to replicate. And that is a persona that we are actively thinking about how we build for. The product doesn't do it today, but when you think about the viewer and the person who is trying to upskill and improve, there are a lot of elements there that can be broken within an organization. Someone creates documentation, but all of a sudden that's out of date, and someone else is following it, but they're following the old process, and that old process is going to be broken. And so they're not going to feel like they're learning anything. And so, for us, I think for the viewer, what we care a lot about is, how do we reduce stale documentation within organizations such that they can feel like, okay, everything that I'm accessing or touching is relevant, it's applicable to what I'm doing. And then it's in a format that actually, walks me through what I need to do. So these are things that are, on the product roadmap. We haven't built for it yet, but to your point, helping people see improvement, helping people feel progress, that's critical in any, outside of business, right? I mean, it's critical in anything.
Do you have any sort of idea? And I just, speaking, very broad, of course, on this, but like what kind of like percentage of improvement is like being left on the table in that kind of a category, if you were to extrapolate a little bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a few ways to measure improvement. I'll talk through kind of the most simplistic one, but it's really around efficiency. And so there's a study published by McKinsey, maybe last year or the year before, that analyzed kind of the access that employees at a company might have when it comes to knowledge. And the outcome of the study was that employees spend on average 20% of their work week, so one full day, just looking for the right information. And so that for us, I mean, when you talk about a margin for improvement, that's a pretty nice one to be working with. And so, if we can make that knowledge more comprehensive, more accessible, and make sure that it's relevant, I mean, that's a huge efficiency gain for an organization.
Yeah, and man, I can attest to that, because I was just thinking back to putting together a slideshow for a speech I gave, and then catching myself diving into pictures and stock photos, and it's like, next thing you know, you spend an hour looking at various pictures of a bridge, and trying to find the right one after you finally get some. And yeah, there's a lot of wasted time there. How you've implemented the tool, I'm sure, within Tango, kind of the, using what you're selling. How has that come along? Have you seen, like, I would imagine, just understanding what we're talking about here, a leaping forward of processes and systematic improvements because of that. Have you been able to, like, set y'all's expectations and go, wow, this thing's really working and helping us leap ahead further?
Yeah, it's really cool to be able to build a product that also directly benefits your team. We've scaled up a ton in the last year. I mean, I think a year ago we were, I want to say 8 employees. We're 24 now. So we've tripled the size of the team. And with that comes, you're onboarding more people, you're getting them up to speed. Everyone has different levels of context. And so we have our own, Tango team workspace that contains all of our processes. It makes it really easy to point to, hey, this is where you find that info. The other benefit, which is why, a lot of software companies, they call it, you got to eat your own dog food, right? Mm-hmm. So dog fooding the product. So we have dog food.
I would have chose steak or something like that, not dog food, but okay.
Sample your own whiskey. There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, exactly. We always laugh about it too, because it's kind of grotesque, but yeah. But we do like dog food days before any major launch, where we just, we go for volume. We're testing the product. We're testing edge cases. We're trying to incorporate it as much as we can into our daily workflow. And I think that's helped us create a better product, because we experience that pain on our end too.
One of the things I always want to learn about, especially when you talk about tripling the size of the company, and either my mind missed it. You said a year, right? Yeah. Okay. Just making sure I heard that right.
Yeah.
How do you do that? How did y'all sit there and go, holy crap, the guys over here are working a lot, and what were your decision points, I guess, would really be one of those beneficial nuggets of information of how you recognized it and came to that conclusion.
Yeah. it's probably more art than science. But I think for us, we've always felt deep down that we have a tremendous opportunity to provide a solution to market as quickly as we possibly can. I mean, that's why we, pursued venture capital investment. And, that's usually when you obtain venture capital investment the way that we have, the expectation is to grow the business as fast as you can, grow the team as fast as you can. And so there's those incentives are there. You also want to make sure that, you're not growing too fast or just growing for the sake of growing. And so for us, it was, understanding that hiring, is a top priority, and just making sure we got great people to be part of the team, to be able to build a product and grow in the way that investors would expect. But we also instituted a hiring process that would be diligent, thorough, and make sure that we're onboarding the right people. I think there's kind of an old saying, I forget where I even heard it, but most startups grow out of business. Most startups don't go out of business; they grow out of business, meaning they hire too much or they spend too much trying to acquire users. And so making sure that we've been very calculated throughout this and doing a lot of what you said, hey, someone's taken on XYZ responsibilities. It's now become too much. Which of these can we actually, hire for, and who can augment this team? So as much as we've been incentivized to grow, we've also sort of like tried to reel ourselves in and make sure we're always hiring the right people, and we're doing it at a time where there's enough responsibility to be handed off.
What was that experience like, balancing the investor expectations while still having, the smart growth? Because I think that's like the boogeyman in the shadows for a lot of entrepreneurs. They think about, it's like, I bring somebody in and then it's cracking the whip, like go, go, go. And then, you lose control of your baby. And, it's clear that you did a good job with that. So what was that process like, balancing those expectations?
I think it was less of balancing the expectations as much as it was having strong relationships with our investors. There are oftentimes when you go out and fundraise, there is this feeling as the founder that you're sort of just begging for anyone. Please invest in this business. Please see what I see in this opportunity, and that you can only be so lucky to receive a term sheet or receive an investment. But the partner on the other side of the table matters a lot. And so, for us, when we went out to do our initial fundraise in the fall of 2020, we kind of said, hey, you know what? If we get a lot of people that are interested in investing, but we're not that excited about partnering with them for a long time, we're going to explore other options. The only way we're going to take that investment if we feel we have a strong partner, and a strong partner is not something where we can like avoid conflict. In fact, I think the best investors are the ones that push you in certain areas, but investors that can be strong partners in the sense that they know the vision and they'll be able to provide some kind of insight to help you get there. And so having those relationships, having sort of mutual trust and respect, I think that was what got ahead of having to balance that. Obviously they want you to grow faster, but if you come at it from a framework of, here's why we're growing in the way that we are, and then eventually you're going to see that hyper growth, and they believe you and they trust you in that, then you're not worried so much about having those conversations.
Did that moment ever come where you're going back to talk with the team and the money was there but the people weren't? And how did that, and if it did, or I guess first, did that conversation ever come?
I think the team, there were definitely points where the team felt like, holy cow, we need more help. And that's always hard, right? Like whenever you're leading a team and people are overwhelmed or underwater, you want to provide them the support, but they also understood how special the internal culture what is that we have, and that like just hiring for the sake of somebody else who can take on more, but maybe doesn't fit the culture or isn't the right person that we need, that can be detrimental. So, I give credit to the team in that there wasn't a lot of pushback in the way that we grew the team. And obviously, still growing 3x in a year is pretty fast. But once you get that right first 10 hires or first 15 hires, it has this like cascading effect where, you're able to attract and retain really great people. So it definitely has gotten easier over time.
So beyond the roller skates, sorry, I had to work that in, just had to say that. Beyond the roller skates, how did you build the team? Because you're, 8 people, that's my little analogy of the kitchen table, right? You're the kitchen table size business.
Yep.
And then throw in 16 more in a year. That's a significant change. How did y'all, keep that together to where, because from what you're describing, it's you still have that close-knit feeling amongst the team where, the communication is free flowing and
Sure.
maybe not principled confrontation, but free flowing discussions of how things work and what you doing, what am I doing, those sort of things. How did you maintain that in the growth?
Yeah, it's not all the roller skates, that's for sure. And what Otis is referencing is one of our employee benefits is people can pick out a pair of roller skates. We've got some crafty benefits like that, also like a national parks pass.
Yeah.
Just trying to incentivize people to get outside and take a break from their computers. But for us, we invested a lot early in I would almost say like infrastructure of culture. What is our mission? What's our vision, purpose, even positioning statement, core values. I wrote about our core values on LinkedIn. That often gets referenced during our hiring practices, like, your values really resonated with me. Communication norms. So we're a fully remote team. We're actually in 11 states. So those 24 employees are in 11 states. So about as dispersed as you can get. And so, communication becomes really important in that environment. And so we established communication norms, which you can actually see on our blog at blog.tango.us. And so a lot of that, I think, gave us the guardrails to be able to make sure that people were aligned on the why. That's that mission, vision, purpose. And also, an underserved element of culture, how we work, how we communicate, what our operating cadence looks like. All that stuff plays really heavily into culture. A lot of people mistake culture for everyone's nice to each other, which is important too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the operating cadence, how we work, we invested a lot of time into that. In fact, we invested time in that at a point where we were even looking at ourselves being like, do we really need this? Like, the team's small enough. Do we really need it? But we knew that it would have downstream impact.
Did you pick that up at Uber or one of your other partners? They learned a hard lesson from some place they'd been, where because that's not a natural thing. Most businesses, in my experience seeing it, is they take off running and then they're like, oh yeah, I wish we would have. So where'd that lesson come from?
I mean, that's where I think a lot of our studies at Harvard Business School helped. I think the most powerful class that we all took was a class called LEAD. Appropriately, it's about leadership, but they had to make it into an acronym because, it's business school. But we studied a lot of really what makes teams effective, and we looked at different models: self-managed teams, outsourced teams, heavily distributed remote teams. And there was a common thread in all of them, in that they were very they're very strong mission-driven organizations. People work there for a reason, and it wasn't about, cash compensation. It wasn't about, potential upside. I mean, those are nice benefits, but it was because people really believed in what they were solving and where it could go. And so that, I think, was a big takeaway for us from that class, such that, we said early on, we're going to make that conscious investment.
How did when you're going through that ideation process, setting it up, so you started off with, I think a lot of entrepreneurs start off this direction where it's a problem, then we create the solution, then you go from, create the business from there. You chose a super big, super hairy problem to start off with. And there's multiple solutions that could be working all sorts of different directions. And realistically, the more we talk through this, it could be very different businesses all in that. How did you hone that in back towards that problem set without overcomplicating the business aspect of it?
We valued simplicity a lot. And you see this now with a lot of like bottoms up software, product-led growth companies, where they're optimizing for that like sort of time to aha moment. As soon as you sign up, clock starts ticking, like how quickly do you realize value? And so for us, I think that forced us to think really simply about this problem. Obviously the product will become more complex, but also, deliver more value over time. But for us, it was sort of our wedge to say, okay, what's the most acute problem we can go after? It's that people hate spending time on documentation. It feels secondary to their core role. It often becomes stale very quickly. And then once you write an article for your team, you become kind of the head of customer support for that article. So,
right.
There was just so many reasons. And so we said, if we can kind of lower that barrier, the easiest way to do so is if we can just create documentation in the flow of work. That's a very quick aha moment, and it's solving for somebody's time. So I think that's where we got kind of the emphasis on simplicity in our product. And we still, even as we're building more features and functionality, we still kind of come back to that. Is this easy to use? There's a great book called The Mom Test, which, no discredit to moms whatsoever, but the idea is like, you should be able to explain this to anybody. Anybody should be able to pick it up and work with it. So it's a great book, and it helps you sort of frame it in the sense of like, you're always going to be the person closest to the problem, closest to the solution, always going to know it really intimately. Find people that aren't, and make sure that they can understand what you're doing.
That's it's a derivative of Napoleon's corporal. So Napoleon used to, he had a corporal, or he would grab a corporal and explain the plan to the corporal, the attack plan or defense plan, whatever it was. And if the corporal understood it, then he knew it was a good, solid, simple plan that would be easy to execute. So I'd never heard of the mom test.
Yeah, someone took that and branded, did some good branding and sold a book. So
oh yeah, good on them.
I wanted to follow up one thing on that, Ken. How has your view on how has your view towards problem solving and the simple approach changed as the business has grown? Because I could see that being something where you have these, 5 or 6 ideas back there that don't really fit into Tango. And are you still looking at them like, okay, hey, 5 years from now, we're doing this one. 10 years from now, we're doing this one. And we're going to like slowly integrate it and make it, that all encompassing solution? Or have you realized that the simplicity of what you're working with is what you want to stay with in the long run?
It's hard to say one or the other. I feel like where we have tried to not let ourselves like run away with new features and new experiences and new all encompassing, like you were saying, experiences. But the way that we've hedged against that is making sure that we're always like listening to customers and what their feedback is. And so we kind of default to, okay, what are our power users saying? What do they need in the product? Obviously, end users' needs, those change over time. What you provide one day might not be good enough, in a couple months. They have use cases and featured ideas in their head that they want to use your product for. And so they want it to evolve. And so instead of falling down this rabbit hole of like, okay, well, let's just continue to build all the things that we think of, we just tried to stay close to users. And
like approaching it from the customer side, basically, rather than the problem side.
Yeah, exactly. Because, obviously there was some hook there that got someone using the product, becoming a power user, making that sort of cognitive leap to say, okay, here's what we need next. And so, that's someone who values the simplicity that you built for in the beginning, but is also shaping, how this product can evolve. So that's how we've tried to do it. But naturally over time, as that complexity increases, you're going to have a very different look and feel.
And I got a little follow up on that, because I was in that same zone of the complexity versus simplicity versus we got to make some money here. How did you manage? Because right, you're like, oh, cool, we could do this, or we could just get it out there and start getting revenue. How do you manage that?
Yeah, we really wanted to get it out there, and not just for revenue, because we actually started with just a free version of the product. There was actually no way to pay for Tango at the beginning. What's more valuable at that point in time is actually the data around users' engagement and understanding how they're using the product, where they're getting tripped up, where they're falling off, what types of users are gravitating to the product, what that sort of customer persona might be, and understanding, how do we hone in on that? How do we acquire more users like that who are going to use it in a way that is kind of what we envisioned. And so that data, but also the feedback, that is the reason for getting a product out early. Revenue is great, but we moved quickly to be able to get feedback so people could tell us, hey, this is exactly what we want, or hey, this is not what we want. And so we were kind of ready for that hard truth. But thankfully, people loved it, and adoption has only grown.
Awesome. What's next for Tango? Where are y'all going next? What's the next level, or whatever, however you want to frame it?
Yeah, I think for us, we talk a lot about how do we, we've delivered value to date for the creator of documentation, saving them time. How do we deliver value for the consumer of documentation? And once you can really deliver on that, this ability to execute, replicate, guide people through workflows, I think that's when you can make the case that this type of product is valuable across an organization, because people usually fall in one of two camps or both. And so, we wanted to just be sure that we weren't just creating a product for creators.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes those can be fewer and further between, but for the entire team. So that's what's next for us. And I think I talked about it a little bit earlier, but that's also, that's what our product roadmap reflects, is really building for that viewer.
Oh, awesome. Well, I can tell you, I learned something about Uber, and I just love that phrase. I'm sorry, but it was just too much for me in the learned category to not fall into it. I wish I would have learned that phrase about 20 years ago, because I had a boss that we operated in principled confrontation. It was a closed door relationship, and usually involved some wrestling and some punches being thrown. all in good nature and, for the betterment of the greater good. Let's just say,
Sure.
yeah, but principled confrontation. I love that. I love that. That was going to stick with me for a while. So I appreciate learning that today. Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Well, between the mom method and Napoleon and what you're saying and mine, we're really just staying on rebranding old knowledge. Because for me, Ken, you said it like this: invest early in the infrastructure of culture. And that is one of those things I feel like I must have read or heard at least 100 times. But you got it's that must be the Harvard brain. You got the perfect phrasing on there. It's like that's sticking with me now.
Thank you.
Awesome. How about you, Ken? What'd you learn?
Yeah, I loved your bit on Napoleon's corporal. I think that's super interesting. I mean, I'm a big history buff, but it makes sense. I think communicating, it's what we talk about with our communication norms, but making sure people can understand what you're setting out to do and the value you're going to provide. I mean, that's paramount.
Awesome. How can folks learn more about Tango, follow you, get in touch with you? What's the best way?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're tango.us. That's our website. I can tell you everything you need to know about the product. We still have a free version that people can test out. No credit card required. And so, we welcome folks to do that. And then, if you want to reach out to me, very easy. I'm Ken at tango.us. So we'd love to hear your feedback.
That's awesome. Ken, we really appreciate you hanging out with us and sharing with us today. Camden, run us out, please.
All right. Thank you all for listening to the Cam Otis Show, and a special thanks to our guest, Ken Babcock, for joining us today. And of course, our sponsor, Tribe and Purpose. Find your tribe, find your purpose. Get started for free today at findyourpurpose.coach. Make sure to follow the Cam Otis Show on Instagram and Facebook. And please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. Videos of the podcast are on our YouTube page, and you can always get a full archive of the episodes at thecamandotisshow.buzzsprout.com. Thanks again. We'll see y'all next time.